House of Wolves was Destiny 1's second major expansion, if you can even call it that, and just like me, it came out with little fanfare and a lot of controversy leading up to the event. Those of you, like me, who were the ripe age of 14 at the time, experienced what would become the second worst content drought in the history of Destiny between the release of The Dark Below and the House of Wolves. When I say there was nothing, I mean there was literally nothing to do between December, the release of The Dark Below 2014, and May, the release of House of Wolves 2015. It was a brutal stretch, and I didn't play a whole heck of a lot during that time. I re-picked up the game again, like many people, a couple days before the release of House of Wolves. And I gotta say, at the time, I remember being perfectly whelmed. I was exactly whelmed, and playing through the campaign 10 years later, that's literally it. I'm still whelmed. I struggle to say underwhelmed, because it is definitely better than The Dark Below, to say the least, off of, a purely story perspective, just, when you consider the self-contained adventure, not the arcing storylines that The Dark Below ended up becoming. But, the package of House of Wolves was definitely, at the time and upon reflection, better than the package of The Dark Below. And I do think that, House of Wolves is not the worst of all the Destiny expansions, but it is obviously the second worst. It was definitely a step up in quality from The Dark Below. But steps come in many different shapes and sizes, and the step between Dark Below and House of Wolves, it didn't take a lot to get up that step, but here is the finished product, and yeah, this is a reflection and replaying of the House of Wolves 10 years later. I hope you enjoy. Well, you always gotta take a minute to let the trumpets play out, but yeah, this is it. House of Wolves 10 years and 1 month later. We are going to be doing it a little differently this time. My in-game audio and my commentary, the last time I recorded it, did not sound good, so hey, here we are, gonna switch it up a little bit. Starting us off with the main draw of the expansion, what most people solely interacted with the story of the game, and was it better than anything that came before it? Yes, it was marginally better than The Dark Below. We had a grand total of 6 story missions this time. Yeah, count that correctly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We had 6 story missions, and I couldn't even begin to tell you what happens in 4 out of 6 of those missions, which for Destiny at a time is a massive step up in the writing quality, because for The Dark Below, I couldn't begin to tell you what happened in 3 of those story missions. Not to be so reductive, but does the story hold up well today? Well, it definitely holds up better than The Dark Below did at the time. When you compare House of Wolves to the other Destiny expansions, that being Dark Below, House of Wolves, Warmind, and Curse of Osiris, it is definitely the best of the worst Destiny products that Bungie has released. And I don't measure playtime as being good, but in this case, I only managed to squeeze out around an hour and 35 minutes of playtime from House of Wolves compared to, Dark Below's approximately 55 minutes. Moving on to the actual story content, the characters that were introduced in this expansion: Petrevenge, Varix. We got some, a couple dialogues from Sov, Marasov, and they are exactly the same as they are today. The character development for the past 10 years for this particular group has been marginal, to say the least. Despite what you may think, despite the multiple seasons focused on them, they are still pretty much, I say pretty much, they're still pretty much the same characters that they are in 2025 as they were in 2015, which is kind of impressive when you think about it. Don't get me wrong, Petrevenge is one of my favorite characters in the franchise, but she hasn't changed. She hasn't changed at all in 10 years. The story missions weren't anything special. Nothing was innovated. No real gameplay changes compared to anything we've seen up to this point. Most missions, I say most, all of them, were simply point A to point B, kill a bunch of things, listen to people yap at you. There were, a couple objectives intertwined just to, spice it up a tiny bit, but a tiny bit still isn't much. Besides the point A to point B, there was a little bit of variety. I got to play with a Scorch Cannon for a little bit. Got to hunt down a handful of Barons. The Vex Citadel in the final mission was the, shining. It was a good mission. It's the only mission of the 6 that I would actually be considered good, worthwhile playing a second time. Got to go into the Vault of Glass. That also was a good mission. You got to fight some oracles, people that hadn't been into the Vault of Glass before actually got to see it at the time. But besides that, this is pretty, your standard cookie cutter Destiny adventure. This is not too out of line with what we would see from a seasonal story nowadays, except the writing is definitely way, way worse. And at the end of it, when you finally get to go face Skolas, it really feels like a worthwhile conclusion to the adventure, even though it is not technically the conclusion of the adventure. You can't actually access them anymore, but in year 1, there were wanted bounties you can access through Petra, a little bit of story beats, you can get some Grimoire cards through them at the time. But spoiler warning, if you don't know already, you don't actually kill Skolas, you just kind of knock him down until he says, ouchie, I need my life alert, and then he gets captured, put into the Prison of Elders, and then eventually, for some unknown story reason, you get to go into the Prison of Elders and fight him again. That's where you get the seasonal or the DLC exotics from. We're going to talk about those a little bit later, but the Citadel was the high point. It was a really, really cool environment. Besides that, nothing else sticks out as being a cool place, similar to the Oversoul Chamber in Dark Below, but the Oversoul Chamber, had access to that in vanilla if you just knew where you were going. You did not have access to the top of the Vex Citadel if you knew what you were doing in vanilla Destiny 1. And once you do complete the story, you are rewarded with something, a couple good things. Just for starters, you do get the Vestian Dynasty, the first ever sidearm in Destiny. So this DLC did add a new weapon class. So the Vestian Dynasty was the first sidearm until Taken King, the very next DLC. It was good. It was really, really good at the time. Sometimes bordering on unbalanced, but Destiny 1 vanilla into Taken King was a very, very unbalanced, very, very unbalanced environment, especially with those special ammo weapons, sidearms originally being special ammo, before being converted to primary for Destiny 2, so it was just a little bit easy to manipulate if you knew what you were doing. As well as the Vestian Dynasty, you got the Treasure Key, and you also got some stupid glimmer from the Cryptarch, but the Treasure Key is interesting. The first time you were to complete the Prison of Elders per character, you were able to go through the Prison of Elders, and in that final chest, you were going to get access to one of the 3 exotics, those 3 exotics being Lord of Wolves, Queenbreaker's Bow, and Dreg's Promise. 2 of those are in Destiny 2 to this day. Dreg's Promise is still stuck in Destiny 1. It was a bad weapon. They would have to make a significant rework to actually make it good, but, let's pay no mind to our modern-day impressions of the things like the Queenbreaker's Bow in current Season 25 environment with artifact mods. Queenbreaker's Bow was always, and for the majority of Destiny's lifetime, a bad weapon. Same thing with Lord of Wolves. And the same thing with Dreg's Promise. Do not let your current interpretation of these weapons as they exist in Destiny 2 fool you. Actually using them in Destiny 1 is a bad idea. They are not good weapons. You're going to have a bad time. Lord of Wolves, Dreg's Promise, Queenbreaker's Bow, they all were bad, always were bad. They never were good at any time. 3 underwhelming exotics. They should have been buffed at some point, but they never were. Moving on to the actual good part of the rewards, you get the Treasure Key. The Treasure Key is essentially the best part of the entire loop of the Prison of Elders. You get a lot. You get a lot of gear. You used to get Ascendant materials, or you still can get Ascendant materials if you play the Year 1 version, the Year 1 versions of the dungeon. At the time, it was one of the best ways to farm besides hard mode raids, Ascendant materials to upgrade your weapons. You can get year 1 and DLC 1 and 2 exotics as long as they weren't quest locked. I know for me myself, the first time I went through and used a treasure key, I got the Dragon's Breath. And exotics at this point in Destiny's lifetime were remarkably hard to get. They were super hard to get, so having a way to at least target farm them a little bit easier before the 3 coins was introduced into the game, it just meant the world. Moving on to the actual Prison of Elders itself, this is where the bulk of all of the creative energy into this DLC was poured into. Obviously it was cut content, as we, now know, supposed to be launched with Destiny 1 Vanilla, but it wasn't. It was just repackaged and shaped into its own DLC. But the Prison of Elders, it was a good idea, is a good idea. It was such a good idea that it was made the sole focus of the Taken King era April update in the middle of the content drought, and I always had fun playing Prison of Elders. There was never a time when I was like, damn, this sucks. From the year 1, from the actual Skolas version of farming him to try to get those year 1 weapons, the ascent materials, and from the year 2 and April update, getting those Taken armaments, getting those really good chroma, getting those chroma weapons from Varix in the year 2 version of this. The Prison of Elders was a great time, and it was brought back, in kind of a spiritual successor as the prison, the Challenge of the Elders, rather, in the Destiny 2, one of the more recent episodes. A couple different difficulty tiers. At launch, your loot varied based on that. There was like a level 24 through level 30 or 28 version at launch. There was a Skolas exclusive boss mode. It was a good time, depending on who you're playing with. It was surprisingly hard. It was surprisingly hard at launch. Now, obviously, there is some controversy with whether there was and is controversy. Oh, this should have been a raid. This should have been just another thing. There should have been a raid during House of Wolves. I tend to disagree. Raids are something that take a little bit longer than 3 months to cook, and we kinda can tell that Crota's End was a little bit of a rushed experiment. Whether or not they were working on it at the same time as Vanilla, it's obvious to tell that for Crota's End, the raid team didn't have enough time, and the raid in year 1, Destiny 1, when it was launched during Dark Below, it suffered. Now, imagine that. If the development time between Dark Below and House of Wolves is anything to tell you, the development team may have had even less time or about the same amount of time to construct a raid for House of Wolves as they had for Dark Below. And it would have been just as bad, if not worse, as Crota's End. Now, I've neglected to mention so far, but there was also something else that was introduced during House of Wolves, and it was Trials of Osiris. Now, some people are going to say that this is the best thing to ever happen to Destiny. I tend to disagree. I don't think that competitive Destiny PvP is a fun It's a fun experience. Looking at my stats from the time, I went flawless a grand total of 4 times throughout the entirety of Destiny 1, twice during Taken King, once during Rise of Iron, and once during House of Wolves. That really can tell you how I actually felt about this. I did not play PvP very much, and even if I wanted to, for the sake of making my 10 years later series, go back and play Trials of Osiris, I can't. It was removed from Destiny 1, so you can't even play it. You can still play a Crucible mode, you can still do custom games to kind of simulate Trials of Osiris, but it really isn't the same, and to be honest, I wasn't going to try to find 6 people to get on just to run Trials of Osiris. As you can tell, I really don't care. I have no strong feelings for Trials of Osiris. To me, Trials of Osiris was always means to an end, to acquire loot, to take back into the actual game, whether that's getting Doctrine of Passing from Trials of Osiris, or getting whatever that funky scout rifle from the Rise of Iron era of Trials of Osiris one, that really, really good one that had explosive payload to it. For me, there wasn't a lot that was worth playing Trials of Osiris for. It was just too much stress. But I do recognize that a significant portion of the community and the entire PvP Destiny scene at the time was revived, revitalized, and it basically carried it for a very, very long time. I'm not going to downplay the significance of Trials of Osiris just because me personally, I do not like Trials. However, I'm going to say that if it's take it or leave it, I'm going to leave it. Besides that, what else is there to say? I mean, House of Wolves was the strongest Destiny 1 was besides, launch week vanilla and the launch of Vaults of Glass before the game got really stale. There was always a lot to do during that time. Prison Builders always had a variety, four new Crucible maps. Widow's Court, the only one that survives to this day. Shadow Thief, that was a good strike. That came out. I wouldn't mind if that one was brought back to Destiny 2. It is technically a moon strike. It only mattered during the end of the lifetime of Destiny 1, but sending your weapons, you could reroll the perks, reroll all the perks on the weapons using ethereal materials with the gunsmith. That was introduced during House of Wolves. An absolute load of weapons were introduced during House of Wolves. There's a couple notable standouts that I have very fond memories of, and some of them are in Destiny 2. I mean, just to name a few, Aegis of Kel, Wolfborn Oath, Wolf's Leash, but to be fair, most of the Fallen Theme weapons were kind of bad. Those are just like the most memorable ones, because you were able to get them through the Prison of Elders if you played it on the hard mode in both the kinetic and in the elemental varieties. You can roll them in all the elements, so those were very, very unique at the time, but unique doesn't necessarily mean they were the best. They still didn't outcompete year one options that were vanilla options that were ascended. Obviously your Fatebringers, like nothing was beating that really. A couple more, like Felwinter's Lie, the Iron Banner, this slate of Iron Banner weapons were very, very good. Felwinter's Lie was released during House of Wolves. Scourge's Avenge, Radagast's Fury, Aphrodite's Spear, those like staple Destiny 1 Iron Banner weapons, like stuff you think about like in the game today. They're like, damn, wow, like that was a good weapon. Like a lot of them, like half a dozen of them were released during House of Wolves. Like it was a very, very Iron Banner did eat during House of Wolves. Also, can't forget to mention the exotic armor, some of the exotic armor that was introduced during this time. At the time, they may have not been the best. You got Feedback Fence, Bones of Ao, Celestial Nighthawk, how could I ever forget about that one? Eternal Warrior, Kepri Sting, Nothing Manacles, Pentagram Greaves, Purifier Robes, and the Ram. The Ram, probably one of, if not the best Warlock exotic that was ever available to use in period in Destiny 1. The Ram was crazy for any warlocks, just getting extra health, period. I don't know how it shipped, but it was one of the many broken things. It was one of the many broken parts of the meta. Me personally, hey, Bones of Ao and Celestial Nighthawk as a hunter, hey, I was doing good. But besides that, I think I've covered everything that I want to cover with House of Wolves. 10 years later, going through and actually playing through the story content, playing through the Prison of Elders, playing through pretty much everything that I can that is still available to me. I had fun. I always have fun returning to Destiny 1. If you haven't, I really think you should. It is a breath of fresh air. It's super, super, refreshing just to actually get back into Destiny 1 playing as a new character, just experiencing the game again. Almost for the first time, because I hardly remember. I hardly remember most of, if not anything, of Destiny 1. I mean, before making this video, I could have sworn that at least half of the exotics that I thought were House of Wolf exotics ended up coming out in either Taken King or Dark Below. This era of Destiny is misremembered. People are very nostalgic for it, but they don't really understand what they were nostalgic for. It was better than Dark Below, yes, but it wasn't particularly good. It wasn't a high point. It was just a higher point than we were, and it was at the time, good stepping stone into what became, I would argue, the second greatest expansion in the history of Destiny, the Taken King. But besides that, I would like to thank each and every single one of you who made it this far for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I have two more, Destiny 10 year later, Vanilla, and the Dark Below. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and make sure to turn on the notifications so that you don't miss the next one.